Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. I'm excited for this panel that we have today. My name is Andrew. I'm a founder thank you. And a member of the AI Futures Fund. I think it's a little bit exciting and unique that I've been asked to moderate a panel of some amazing DeepMind PMs. We're going to try and take this conversation today from a founder and PM perspective. So we're going to be discussing product trade-offs on the DeepMind side, how do they get research into our hands, and then how do we as founders make sense of the new product launches that seem to come every 24 hours at this point. We're going to talk about how we plan our roadmaps. We're going to talk about how we sort of skate to where the puck is going today. And honestly, we're going to talk about one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot. How do you decide to cut certain features from the Gemini models, from the DeepMind releases? How do you make those trade-offs between things that you know the models could do and what actually makes it into our hands? So I'm going to start asking you questions, and we'll go from here to there. Introduce yourselves, but introduce yourselves, please, from the lens of a product trade-off, a really hard one that you had to make in the last year or so. So please, go ahead, Olivier.
Hi, everyone. My name is Olivier. I'm the product lead for open source and compact models at DeepMind. In terms of like very hard trade-off I had to make like in the last year, I would say like some of the decisions have to be with the size of our open source model, which is called Gemma, and some of the capabilities that we actually include in Gemma. When you reduce the size of your model, you need to be quite tactical about like what you decide to actually put into the model, like the benchmark that you want to hill climb on, and the level of intelligence per watt, mainly because we run on edge devices that you have to optimize for. So those are some of the decisions I have to make, like on a maybe not weekly basis, but like for each and every release we have. And we spend a lot of time optimizing for that because we want to make sure like our developers get the best like bang for the buck with our Gemma models.
Amazing. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. I'm Rohan. I lead multimodal understanding, so understanding images, videos, PDFs for Gemini, and I also lead our audio-visual experience for our live model. It's a real-time audio-to-audio conversational model. One of the hardest trade-offs I've had to make recently was around the timing of the launch of agentic vision, a new capability launch with Gemini 3 Flash. So historically, image understanding has been a static process. You feed an image in and you get a response. But from the research side, we were exploring if we can make this an agentic process, allowing the model to use tools to inspect and to sample visual uploads in order to improve understanding during thinking. And so in December, January, we were seeing signs of life of this capability coming to life. It was, in particular, we were seeing that the model could use code to zoom in on specific details and to look at things more closely, and this was driving quality. But we also wanted to potentially do more, and so the question is, do we want to wait and improve the capability, or do we want to launch with something that's showing signs of life? Ultimately, I think, I have a startup background. I love getting market signal early rather than waiting for the most perfect thing, and if there are founders in the audience, I hope you can empathize there, and so we decided to put the capability out, and it's been awesome to see what all of you've been building with agentic vision, and I'm excited to see if you are working on or using that capability. I'd love to chat more.
Amazing. Thank you. Naina?
Hi, everyone. My name's Naina Raisinghani. I work on Gemini's image generation and editing capabilities, or what we all fondly know as Nano Banana. I think one of the hardest trade-offs that we often have to make, I think, and a lot of PMs will share this, is in Gemini, we're very proud of building these general purpose, incredibly smart reasoning models. But in image and in like media specifically, we want them to be very practical, very controllable, to the point of like if someone is saying, I want the font size to increase, or I want this to move 5 pixels to the right, how do we make our models general purpose while steerable? I think that's always a hard trade-off we have to make, because we'll build models that are we'll get any user 80% there, but then within like a launch, like within 10 minutes of launch, people are like, yes, it's like 80% there, but I can't do this one thing. So it's a continuous, very hard trade-off where you look at evals and you kind of have to make make that decision, but it's always a hard one right up until launch of, is this the general capability that will really unlock things, or do we need to like move towards controllability as well?
Yes, thank you. Kate.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate, and I focus on evaluation and overall model release strategy for Gemini models. I think for me, the biggest challenge is not maybe like a single decision, because we make like thousands of decisions every single day. But I think like a lot of them are roughly within a theme of, velocity versus kind of completeness. As you all know, the AI space moves incredibly fast. And so we do want to bring, like the greatest and bestest as quickly as possible into everyone's hands. But there's a bit of a trade-off of like making sure that the models are actually super robust and answering and being able to answer all of the different types of queries that users might be using, and that they're safe, and that they're going to be deployed in a way that is great for developers to use, and so on. And so I think like making these decisions of like when things are actually like ready to be received well is something that I definitely live with every day.
Yeah, it's so challenging. I think let's stay on that topic. You led release strategy for the recent Flash Lite release, is that correct?
I generally oversee like, the entire portfolio.
So how did you really balance the Flash Lite extreme throughput requirements with intelligence? I'd love to hear your take on like that process.
Yeah, totally. I think, as you know, we have a whole spectrum of models at different sizes. And I think the general intention of having them in the first place is to have different types of models cater to different types of experiences and different ways in which people are using the models. I think, obviously everyone is very excited about the progress at the frontier and where we're going with our biggest, greatest models and being able to push the intelligence towards AGI. But I think people, to some extent, do skip over smaller models, but they definitely have a lot of value. Like when you think about the different kind of cost, quality, latency profiles, Flash Lite is kind of optimizing in the opposite direction than that frontier. There's tons of use cases where the big models just don't really fit well what people are doing. If you think about, like bulk processing pipelines for just doing different sorts of extraction and like actually accelerating different production flows. If you want to ship it at scale, if you think about a lot of products at like Google scale where it's like billions of users and so on, like all of these things matter a lot, I think. So definitely like having an offering that actually is able to help with use cases in that space is super important. And I think increasingly, it's not just these kind of very high level, like different, maybe more old school use cases, but even in the agentic kind of era and universes, like having the small models be able to like do, like a bajillion of different tasks at the same time and be able to orchestrate that can also be incredibly powerful.
Yeah, that's amazing. I feel like the Flash Lite series specifically works so well as sub-agents for large-scale orchestration. Yeah, that's quite cool. Thank you. Rohan, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the multimodal understanding and the agentic intelligence that you mentioned. Traditionally, when I have thought about multimodal intelligence, when founders think about it generally, it's sort of almost an afterthought. It's a feature that you add onto the product, like, okay, great, now you can upload a PDF, or now you can upload an image. I would love for you to maybe push back on that. Like, what do you feel like founders just ignore or don't think about when it comes to agentic vision or multimodal broadly?
Yeah, that's a great question. My belief, if you're an agent builder, is that agents should be natively multimodal from the very beginning to reflect the realities of the sort of business use cases and consumer use cases we're building for. So if you're generating websites, if your agent can't look at what it's generating and critique what it's looking at, or if you are analyzing a PDF and you can't understand the layout and the structure of the PDF and you're only looking at the text, you missed so much context and nuance when you're actually trying to achieve a task. And so in practice, there's a few big ways where you can start to make your agents more natively agentic from the get-go. The first is, let's say you're doing an agentic document understanding or knowledge work sort of task. Treat your PDFs, your spreadsheets, your PowerPoints as images, not just raw text. And I think just being able to capture the layout, the structure, all of this extra context really improves the performance of most tasks. The second big bucket is around critique. If you're generating a slide deck or a PowerPoint or a website, make sure your model looks at what it generates and ask, does this look correct? Are there any visual artifacts that look off? Are things laid out correctly? And you'll find that the models are able to iterate and improve if they're able to look and see what they're generating. And the last thing is evals. To land an agent in enterprise, you need great evals to measure quality. But what we find when we talk to a lot of companies and startups is that evals are often tech-centric. And if you want to reflect the end business use case, think, is there a way I can make my evals more expressive and more multimodal from the very beginning? I think there's a lot of value there.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that. So I work, our startup is very creative. We try and build creative tools for creative peoples. And so I am personally in love with Nano Banana. I think it's one of the greatest launches that has been done by Google in so long, so kudos to that. It can do so many things, right? Character consistency, it can render text, but there are some things that maybe came as a trade-off, like, just for example, maybe it's not as good at lighting or materials or something else. I'd be curious, how did you manage those trade-offs for what then became one of the most viral moments of creativity in the recent memory?
I think I don't want to give myself too much credit. There's definitely research scientists in the audience who worked on this. So I'm thrilled to work with incredibly smart people who make these trade-offs easy to make. I think for every capability we think about adding to the model, character consistency being a very good example, there's always these capabilities can drive delight, right? I remember when we were trying to kind of shop the model around to our leads, the moment it clicked was when we had this 80s look on all of our leads. There's an image of Korai, Jeff Dean, Sundar running around with 80s hair and really glittery clothes on, and it really stuck with them. Oh wait, this works. And so there was this magic, moment of magic. But there's also so much practicality in it. If your character isn't consistent, or if you're there's photo editing that doesn't happen. There's product or modeling shots that you can't do. There's so much practical use that comes out of something that we initially think of as magic. So I think there's always, you always have to balance those two. And then there's always that added level of control. Yes, the first shot will be maybe, like I said, 85% right, but then you have to add that you have to give people mask-based editing. You have to give them not just prompting, but select as a tool. So there's always yes, there's that feature that we need to get people there to get that first image right, but then after that, we do have to give them controls for that to unlock really professional grade use cases. I want to see a billboard made by Nano Banana out there in Times Square or 101 if you're from San Francisco. It's not just going to be a T2I prompt, right? It's going to be lots of controls and edits and fine-tuning that will happen on top of it.
That's amazing. So I've never shared this story before, but we at Cartwheel built this capability we called pose mode. And we built it and it sat on a shelf. And the idea was that you would pose a character and you would render them with an AI. And we found whenever you moved the camera just a little bit and you tried to render from a shoulder shot or a low shot, every AI broke. And so we shelved our product. It sat there for 6 months, and then Nano Banana came out. We plugged it in, and it worked out of the box. And so we've released this product, and people loved it, and it was incredible. But for me, it was this pretty amazing moment of, yeah, I had this idea, the product didn't quite work, but then research caught up and was released, and yeah, it was an amazing thing. Okay, another thing that I love is open models. I feel like we were all very excited about the most recent release. Olivier helped run a lot of the PM work there for Gemma. Gemma is this incredible series of models. I'm sure all of you know it. I won't introduce too much more. But it really did come with a trade-off, right? You could have, in theory, trained a huge, gigantic transformer and released it into the world, and it may have not been useful for anyone. So I'd love to get your take on the trade-offs there. How did you decide how big to make these models, how smart to make? I mean, obviously, you're trying to pack as much smarts in there, but that comes with a real trade-off.
Yeah, sure. So I think to start, Google is probably the only company at the moment that has a competitive offer both on the closed source side of the business and the open source side of the business, which makes for some interesting trade-off, as we design the models. Our Gemma models are designed to run on local hardware from your phone. We even have some smaller Gemmas walking on watches, right? So we're talking 80 megabyte models and no bigger than that to, I would say, prosumer environment, very powerful laptop, like consumer GPUs and like semi-professional level GPUs. We cap our model line around 30 billion parameters because for us, like this is like the right sweet spot in terms of like intelligence and like still having models which you can run locally. Like if you go with, let's say, the largest Qwen model or the largest GLM DeepSeek model, those models are like 1 trillion parameters each, right? They are server-side model. This is not the way we create Gemma. And our architectures are actually quite separate depending on where we deploy it. So we have Gemma models that we deploy like on mobile phones, for instance. We have like very specific like architectural trick. We have something called like per layer embeddings where we use like multiple type of ASICs, CPU, GPU, and NPU like working together to handle like some nitty-gritty details on KV caching optimization and multiple like matrix embedders. We have like slightly larger model with our 26B, which is an MOE architecture, which also has been optimized specifically for KV caching constraints. So one thing I'm very happy with Gemma model is that we're very thoughtful about syncing, because like the more your model think, the more like your KV cache footprint is gonna like grow. And if you're running that like on a limited amount of RAM, you're gonna end up in a situation where like at some point, unfortunately for you, like you're gonna get into an error. So it is something that we pay attention to. We have like specific techniques for the quantization. Google has released something called Turbo Quant, which made a lot of noise a couple of weeks ago. This is specifically interesting if you want to do like specific quantization for KV optimization. Excuse me. So there is a lot that comes into play so that basically like for a given amount of parameters, you have like the best level of intelligence. I don't want to spoil like some of the details when it comes to like what we decide to push for or not push for. One thing we were specifically happy with this latest release of Gemma 4 was the fact that for the first time ever, the Gemma models have syncing. They have very deep agentic capabilities like at 2B as well as 31B. They can do code, and there are some fantastic use cases we're seeing from the community, like connecting like OpenClaw to a Gemma 2B, running fully like on mobile phones, doing like generative UI as you go, like pulling from your apps and like really reorchestrating like how intelligence is designed on the phone. And I was part of the team that released, I think, one of the first model on phone like with Android. And you know, at that time, like models were struggling to just like reply back to you. Now they can do like coding like fully locally on device at 2 billion parameter. So it's very exciting, like if you think of where we're going to be like with small models in 2 to 3 years from now.
Absolutely so. To continue that line of thinking for the founders in the audience, how would you suggest that they think about when to deploy Gemma versus when to reach for like a Gemini API? How do you think and reason about that trade-off?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So I think like both the Gemma and the Gemini line are highly complementary. If you are in an environment where you have regulation, so you cannot use a closed source model, then Gemma is your direct answer if you want to have like a state-of-the-art Western model. If you are in an environment where you need to do like heavy fine-tuning, complete fine-tuning of the model, Gemma is also going to be like, you know, like a very good suggestion for you. And there are, you know, like other aspects that you may want to think of, like you are being forced to do on-premise release, like our friends at GCP do offer Gemini on-premise, like there are some restrictions around that. If you're not qualifying for those type of offers, you can actually use Gemma and have like more flexibility. So I think, you know, like the way I think about it is like if you need to have absolute SOTA capabilities that work out of the box, then Gemini is a great answer for you, and it is like the best models we have. If you're willing to go into like the nitty-gritty of the deployment, like get your hands dirty and like modify the model, Gemma can be a great alternative as well.
Amazing. We use Gemma for its video understanding capabilities, and we do lots of local batch processing for that, and it's a beautiful thing. Kate, I would love to get your opinion on this sort of same question, right? Do you have opinions on when people should reach for the API as opposed to reach for Gemma?
Yeah, I mean, I think like most of the things that Olivier mentioned, where Gemma models can actually shine, I think like the flip side of that is probably when you should try to reach for Gemini. I think, you know, increasingly how we deploy the models and so on has been becoming increasingly more complex. I think, you know, the entire way in which way we serve the model, we optimize, you know, like the entire inference and so on. There's a lot of things to deal with. And And on top of this, how you integrate different tools and native access to 1P tools that your models can actually leverage, different inference time techniques. Like there's a lot of benefits that you get from really, like pushing the frontiers, and we still see, I think, like the highest level of capabilities on the closed source models. And so I think for a lot of the use cases where you don't have the constraints that Olivier mentioned, Gemini can be a great choice.
Do you see a world where a lot of those same optimizations stay on the API side? So we're talking about safeguards or different optimizations. Does that make its way into the open world? Do you have an opinion there?
I think it's a question for Olivier.
Yeah, I'm happy to take it. So I think, like, to Kate's point, like, if you want the best thing, which works out of the box, Gemini is your best solution. I mean, obviously, you can go with the competition as well, but, like, Gemini is a fantastic product there. I feel like the notion of optimization will really depend on what you want to get out of your models. So Gemini are designed to be server-side models. Gemma are designed to be local models that run on local machines, right? So the optimization is very different. Like, you don't optimize the same way if you want to do, like, millions of users, like, through, like, TPU scaling versus, like, having the model optimized on your local GPU or your local CPU. In terms of safety, so our Gemma models are supposed to be released outside of an API. So we need to train them slightly differently from what we do with Gemini. We also are very stringent with the data we put there. We need to make sure that everything is ready for open source release. And so, like, some proprietary confidential information will obviously remain, like, one of the key advantages that Gemini sits on. Gemma just, like, offers you, like, another alternative, which is, like, able to be run, like, fully open source.
I love that. Thank you. I'd like to ask a question about the audio-to-audio models and the live models that exist. These are capabilities that you see a little bit in the open source world. They are extremely latency constrained, right? It's very obvious when you're trying to, create a call center agent or something, and it sits for 6 seconds and waits, right? How do you encourage? I guess, Rohan, I go to you. How do you encourage your systems to be fast enough? Like, how do you make those trade-offs between model size and so on?
Yeah, so, there's like two approaches, right? So you can have on-prem devices, you can take an open source sort of approach, and if you can hit the quality bar that you need with a smaller model in the most latency constrained sort of setting, that might work. When you have a model in the cloud, you can typically have a larger model which can hit a higher quality bar. So for the customer support use case, for example, where the quality of the resolution and the accuracy of the resolution of an open issue is of the highest importance, then there might be a strategic importance for why you might want to opt for a larger model that's cloud hosted. We're actively always thinking about latency. And so it's something where I feel like there's a lot of open research and for improving things, right? And I think the gap is something that we think a lot about. So if you follow the broader trend of models, I think things will just get better with time. But yeah, I think there's just a quality latency trade-off at the end of the day. And so you have to figure out what works for your use case.
I think that's exactly right. And it's amazing that the quality latency trade-off is so much less painful than it used to be. I feel like, everyone says this, but we get releases so quickly. Every few months, there's another jump in capabilities. I think that makes it really hard for me as a founder to plan my roadmap around. I think many of us feel the same way. We used to do 6 months of planning where we would decide, what research are we going to invest into, what hardware are we going to purchase, and we don't do that anymore. We just can't afford to. So we do 2 months of planning now, and even then that's obsolete. So Naina, I would love to hear your opinions around how do I as a founder, or how do people as workers in this business plan things when they may just not be a useful thing to build in 2 months?
I think like this bench of people and even the group of like researchers we work with, we're great at building, like I said earlier, these general purpose models that will try and get you 80% there. Your startups have so much context, have so much expertise that we can't feasibly bake into the model without it being like a 100 billion, 200 billion token model, right? And we're not serving that. I can pretty much guarantee our SRE back there will be like, no, we're not serving that. So the expertise and the planning that I think you all should be thinking about is how to context engineer. Like if you're building an AI stack for a marketing company, that brand, very rarely will you actually start from like a text to image, like in the generative space. You will start from a brand book. You will start from an experience you want your user to have that is very specific to you. So context engineering. The other thing is, while we are pushing this agentic future forward, the ability to build end-to-end workflows and be very nimble about it. And you've probably had this experience, right? You've made an image and you're like, it doesn't match what I'm like thinking in my head, or like you're very frustrated. But we live in such a privileged space where like we're arguing with models that are doing things in like 10 seconds of the time that it would take us as humans. But that end-to-end workflow is really where you will shine. And I think if you can be nimble about like adding features, responding to your audience, exactly like Rohan said, I think that's kind of the key that you can add.
Amazing. I love that.
Yeah, I wanted to add, I think you actually gave a very good advice earlier when you were talking about, like the experience you've had at Cartwheel. Because I think you mentioned that, you had an idea, you built out a feature that kind of did not really work at the time. And essentially, like nothing happened until, like the model capability increased. But I think at this point, to some extent, it is a fair assumption to make. And so I think like being very proactive in thinking not just like what use cases are the models like serving today, but what will be meaningful potentially, like where you see the vision, but maybe not the level of capability is also a good way to kind of, get ready for the next layer of applications.
Yeah, I think that's great. So if I were to summarize it, something on the order of we're the experts, and so we should we should figure out what things to orchestrate together in an expert way. I think that's great. Amazing. So, well, actually, maybe before we move on, you're a founder, right? Previous founder. How would you manage that trade-off between building something in your product roadmap versus waiting for capabilities?
Yeah, it's tough. I think when you're a founder, it's harder to feel like you have the luxury to build a roadmap that's super long to begin with, right? You're fighting each day to close a deal or drive some adoption or retention or whatever that might be. And so you tend to be in firefighting mode to begin with. So maybe you'll feel the tension a little bit less when you're in founder land. I think you have to be a little bit opportunistic, right, with your roadmap. Whatever roadmap you can build when you're operating a startup, you can make some assumptions about how things will extrapolate, but not too far out. But there should be enough that you can, at least for the sprint cycles that you're operating within a startup, to have some level of stability on where you think the capabilities will be. When the models evolve, you have to constantly reassess. If I have to be completely honest, it's what's making building startups in this era more stressful than I think I've seen in the past when I talk to my founder friends. And that's just, it's just the nature of the time. But I think the flip side of that is that it also makes it the most exciting time to build things as well. So when the technology curve keeps changing, that means you can keep offering more value for your end users, your customers, and the value in your startup can start to compound, and you can create more compelling value propositions ultimately at a rate that just was much harder before when the technology waves moved a bit slower. So,
yeah, I think that's great. If you had to just guess, do you have a sense of what a startup moat might be today outside of data? I think we can all agree data is the ultimate moat of all time.
Yeah, I think a startup knows they can own the outcome the best because they're the closest to the customer. So the frontier APIs that we're building on as a startup community will slowly become more intelligent, they can plan better, they can become more agentic. But there's so much more that you have to still build on top. Really world-class evals that reflect the end-to-end business use case perhaps you're trying to deliver. The ability to add in all of the right signals and context, whether that's through data connectors or MCP, through skills that truly reflect your learned knowledge of the workflows that really need to be nailed. That last mile of is still relatively long, right? And so that hasn't changed just yet, and you can build very valuable businesses there.
Yeah, it used to be said that the last 20% takes 80% of the effort. I actually believe the last, 80% or the last 20% now takes 100% of the effort to some degree. Like, it really is quite challenging to get things over the last mile, especially in these non-deterministic systems. So I think that's great. I think that's great advice. Let's do a few rapid fire questions. I think that might be quite fun. So I'm going to ask each of you questions throughout, and you can answer, and we'll do a couple different rounds of this. Okay, Olivier, what was your favorite thing that went into Gemma 4 as a post-training feature or something that got added to the model?
Yeah, so I think I talked about it a little bit earlier. Like, two of the things that I'm specifically excited about and was very proud that the team landed was token efficiency during syncing, specifically because of some of the constraints we work on. But in general, I think token efficiency for syncing is going to be where we need to push for certain capabilities. The other thing which I am very proud of is the generalization on many tasks that Gemma can actually handle. And what I mean behind that is that we do make sure that at training time, Gemma does not see a single ounce of benchmark in any way, shape, or form, which sometimes impacts our public benchmark. We are not aiming to be the best there, but we want to make sure that the model generalizes very, very well across a wide area of tasks. And we cannot lie. We are an open source model. Everyone can test it. Everyone can benchmark it whatever way they want. And we got some pretty amazing feedback from the community, coming up with their own secret bench of testing Gemma on things that we could have never trained on, and realize that the model are on some of those aspects more powerful than what they look.
I have a secret benchmark, and I'm not going to say it, but I can hint at it. It's a poetry benchmark that I do, and it's totally different, uncorrelated from all the other benchmarks. And Gemma 431B knocks it out of the park. It's the first open model of that size that's ever scored well on my poetry benchmark. But every model, I'll test every single model. I'll sit down, I'll say, do this, do that, do this, do that, and it'll take half hour.
I promise we haven't trained on this one.
I love it. I love it. Okay, amazing. Naina, I'd be curious if you think about when we're talking about benchmarks, people obsess over these benchmarks. Is there a Gen Media, a Nano Banana benchmark that you think is actually not very useful?
The hot take here is text to image. And I genuinely believe that, because I think context, and very few people will start from saying, oh, I want to create a model for my e-commerce shop. I think a lot of them will start with, oh, this is the kind of customer I want. This is the brand book I want to start with. So I think context engineering will make T2I very, very rarely relevant. And so that's the one I look at the least. Don't tell my research scientists.
So you're suggesting that image to image is the ruler.
Yeah. References, and in both references and editing, I think that's going to be the larger corpus. And we see it in our even Gemini app usage. We see that coming to fruition already.
Amazing. I love that. I'm a big Imagine fan, and so I'll stick with that maybe for text to image. That's great. Okay, Kate, what model do you actually use every day? What's your go-to?
I mean, I definitely care, about knowing where we stand at any given point in time. So usually, we produce a ton of new models on, a weekly basis. And so usually my main driver is whatever is, hot off the press to see.
You just test the latest releases.
Totally. I mean, you got to stay at the bleeding edge of innovation. I do use a lot of just, our also older models and competitor models to just be able to get a sense of where the strengths and weaknesses of all the different models are. But yeah, definitely greatest and latest.
I love that.
Main thing.
I think my favorite, I don't know. I loved the way that DeepSeek R1 thought. I don't know if any of you ever watched the thinking traces of that. Cutest little model to ever exist. Oh wait, no, maybe I should do this. So I like to go back to that one every now and again. okay, Rohan, you talked a lot about coding. You talked about agentic coding. You talked about, how it is super useful in different workflows. I'd be curious if you look across all the enterprises that you talk with as a PM, is there one use case that you wish people were flocking to more? Is there something that's just like, if you could shout from the rooftops, you say, please try this workflow?
Yeah, so it's no secret. Everyone's super excited about agentic coding. I think agentic document understanding is the thing that'll underpin a lot of the next set of agents that will excite the industry in the coming months, right? And so if you look at a lot of knowledge work, it has the same sort of building blocks. You have a lot of multimodal inputs, CSVs, slide decks, PowerPoints, whatever, right? And you're reasoning over it, and you're generating other sort of document artifacts, reports, decks, spreadsheets. And I think the ability to map these generalizes to a lot of different industries, right? So whether you're looking at finance, at law, tax and compliance, back office healthcare. And so I just think there's so much value there. And so for me, it feels very obvious that there's a lot of value that'll accrue there after agentic coding for enterprise.
Amazing. Thank you. Okay. Lightning round 1, done. Lightning round 2. I'm going to ask the same question, and we'll just go in a row. What do you think, in terms of long context, is enough tokens? And they famously said we only need 16 megabytes. But if you had to answer generally, what would you think is the cutoff for oh yeah, we only need this many tokens? Okay.
I mean, I think in general, right? The aspiration, I think it would be to be able to put in as much as possible.
The world
of it. I mean, kind of what Naina mentioned, right? The value of a lot of the generations we do is tied to the data that you have, the context that you have, the application that you have, right? All of the things that we were just discussing, that this is the unique value that this startup can provide of actually bringing the knowledge of the specific use cases. And so being able to actually do this is, I think, super critical. I think in terms of putting a number on it, I think it just comes down to what kind of techniques actually work out for being able to stuff that, be expanding into infinite context, which could be, kind of potentially inefficient, being able to do kind of better context compaction and extraction and so on. So I think it's still a very actively evolving space to kind of get to that goal of being able to bring in as much as possible, within the space that we have.
Yeah.
I would go so far as to say there's no wrong amount of tokens, there's just the right amount of tokens for you.
Yeah. Right.
Our ads team, for example, they to get ad adherence, they really have to go back all the way to the first ad that company made and kind of talk through history, talk through how their brand guidelines evolved, and that is just overtly large amount of context, whereas a company that's doing virtual try-on maybe needs 5 images in reference, for example. So we've gotten you have too much context, you have too many tokens in input, and we've gotten you have too little, and there's always going to be both of them. So I think there's I go back to it. There's just the right amount of tokens.
It's just the sweet spot. The porridge is not too hot or cold.
Yes.
Number of tokens. Great.
Yeah, I think I agree with Naina's view. It depends on your use case, and particularly depends on your modality that you tend to operate within. So video is super token expensive relative to image, which is much more expensive token-wise to say text if you're trying to compress the same bits or reflect the same sort of bits. So I imagine if you're trying to do some very heavy video understanding sort of task, you'd probably want more than where the models are at right now, which is, 1 million tokens or so, or wherever our competitors might be too. But there's a lot of use cases that are economically valuable today that could probably be served within where the models are at with the current context windows. But it just depends on what you're trying to ultimately achieve. So probably more depending on the modality you're really operating in.
That's great. And as we expand modalities, that number actually may also grow.
Sure. If your
modality is one startup and you need 15 startups of data in context, right?
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, Olivier, I'd love to hear, maybe in the context of Gemma, but sort of more broadly.
Yeah. So like obviously like on device, you have like some limitation that you do not have server side, which is that context is costly. So you want to be very smart about like how you handle it. I don't think there is a good answer to the context lens. Like, and I think, my colleagues have basically expressed that pretty well. I would say that on top of whatever your model is capable of, there are a lot of agentic framework in place, like in the community, to actually optimize for context engineering. And so like you have to take that into account, which is that you might be able to get a lot out of a model that can do 500,000 or 1 million context window, because you have like many tricks about like how you handle the context, or you feed it into the model, or you take it off, reload new models, and so on. So like it's more than just the model itself, it's the model in the agentic harness that you want to deploy.
I love that. Yep, I think that's a great answer. Okay, lightning round number 3, final lightning round. If you look out into the world, and if you look at the model capabilities that are coming down the track, and anyone you can answer this, please feel free. What company, product, feature do you wish existed? If you could will it into the world, based on what you see coming down the pipe, what would that be? And anyone can answer.
I'm trying to figure out how to answer that without revealing our roadmap.
Good answer.
Yeah, I can give like a quick point of view on that. Personally, I'm very excited with XR. I think like it's bringing like a new modality in play. What Rohan is working on, right? Like, so we'll like display and see what it actually means, like to have like a 24-hour context window of like video streaming. Like, oh, do we handle like the privacy aspect of like having potentially like model like things through your eyes? And in my opinion, it's a very exciting field. Like, and I'm very keen to see like all the technical challenges that will arise as we try to tackle that.
I love that. Yeah, it's the year of XR this year, finally.
I think for me, I come from a family of doctors, so I think for me, like, senior care has always been something that I think we're so undertapped in the AI space, and I've like always kind of played with this idea and concepts in this space. I think that's like, if I were to leave DeepMind, that's where you're going to see me next.
I love that.
I think for me, the most exciting part is actually having at the kind of the application layer different interfaces that kind of more seamlessly integrate into our lives. Like, I think we've seen the evolution from like the chatbots to like the agents running and so on. I think like there's still further steps to be taken about things being proactively detecting my needs and actually being able to recognize where they're needed or not needed. Yeah, I think I would be very excited for that.
Yeah, a startup where the agent texts you first. Okay, we have 2 minutes remaining. Did you?
I can throw in a quick one. So I do think that right now there's a lot of excitement for what comes after agentic knowledge work. It might be robotics and embodied AI. I feel like there's an entire spectrum of complexity between where robots are in the historical sense and where like the full humanoids might be that are still underexplored. And I see a lot of low-hanging fruit there that could be well served by capabilities that could be coming down the line.
Yeah, the Gemini robotics series of models are incredibly adept at different vision tasks. And so I think there's huge untapped potential there. I'd like to just close by thanking our amazing panelists. Let's give them a round of applause. We're grateful that we were able to talk through some of the trade-offs that go into bringing these things into our hands. We'll be down here if you have any questions, but you're welcome to come up and speak with us. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.